Hi, I'm Maya, and today I want to talk about the second half of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So I already made a video about my thoughts on the first half of War and Peace, and that video is up on my channel, so you'll want to watch that one before you watch this one. So my opinions that I expressed in the first half really haven't changed much after reading the second half, after finishing the whole book. I still am annoyed by the same characters, and I still like the same characters. I still have the same qualms about Tolstoy's sexism and his obsession with inserting his own opinions about history and battle strategy. And so still, overall, like I said in the first video, I think Anna Karenina is the superior Tolstoy novel. But that being said, this is an amazing book, and you should definitely read it because it is a classic. And there are many, many good things to learn from this book. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is Pierre and Natasha's relationship. I love the two of them so much, and I think what's so great about them is that we know them separately as full developed characters before they start falling in love. And so we know both of them really well, and we're cheering for them, rooting for them to become a couple. And what's interesting about Natasha and Pierre is that religion saves both of them. They are both reborn, and they find new purpose and meaning in their lives. They feel listless for a long time, but when they find religion, they have a new resolve. Another thing I wanted to mention is the insane hero worship that goes on in this book that's aimed at the Tsar. There's this one scene where the Tsar throws biscuits into the crowd, and Natasha's little brother actually knocks over an old lady to get to the biscuit. So many characters love and adore the Tsar and just are so grateful for him and truly treat him like a god. One scene that I really liked is when Pierre is in a meeting with his fellow noblemen, and he comes to the realization that it's not about what you say, but how you say it. Flowery language and well-crafted speeches are what get people to be on your side, not the content of what you're saying. And that's still very true today. So another one of the characters that I wanted to talk about is Maria. And in the second half of War and Peace, she is judged for not having enough knowledge or the right opinion about the war. But how could she when no one is telling her about it because she's a woman? It's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. All women are the same, according to Tolstoy and the male characters in this book. All of them are too silly and superficial to care about the war or know anything about it. But that's not because they box women out of their conversations about war and forbid them from participating in the discourse, right? It has nothing to do with it, right? So Maria is really put through the ringer in this book. Her father finally, thankfully, dies, and she's guilt-ridden about how happy and relieved she feels. She's just constantly at war with herself and is constantly disappointed with herself when she doesn't need to be, when she needs to give herself some slack and let herself be a human and feel emotions, instead of trying to be a perfect saint all the time. So one thing I noticed about War and Peace in comparison to Anna Karenina, serfdom reform is discussed a lot in Anna Karenina, but in War and Peace, I'm supposed to feel bad for Maria that her serfs don't want to listen to her, and that Nikolai has to save her from her rowdy, disobedient servants. Oh, boo-hoo, her servants have minds of their own. It's just, I understand the context of it all, but it is just hard for me, from my perspective, to feel bad for a woman who has people waiting on her hand and foot in that specific situation where they weren't listening to her and Nikolai had to save her. There are other parts of the book where I do feel bad for her, like when she's struggling with the death of her father. But in that instance, with her disobedient servants, I just didn't have a lot of empathy for her. So I love, love, love the scene where Pierre is observing the war. He goes to the battlefront in normal clothes, and he wears a white hat that sticks out like a sore thumb. I like how at first the soldiers are annoyed with him for getting in the way, but eventually he grows on them, and they develop a fondness for him. I really like that he's in the thick of it, and that he's getting a taste of what it's really like in a war zone with cannonballs zooming past him. There's a part where Tolstoy says that wars aren't won by the orders of the commander or the place where the troops are stationed, or by the number of cannons or the amount of slaughtered men, but by the spirit of the army. And I really like that idea. But if that's how he feels, I don't understand why he spends so much time describing all the things that he says don't matter. I just feel like he really could have condensed the war chapters, and I think that the reader understands what he's saying. And I think if he just quickly had mentioned, oh, these cannons were used, these troops were stationed here, just briefly and every once in a while, I think we would get the picture. But he spends so much time on all of those topics, and so it just makes his theme of war not really being about those things feel a little hollow. So there's a character named Kuragan who fooled around with Natasha and ruined the engagement between Natasha and Andrei. And there is an absolutely gut-wrenching, beautiful scene where Andrei is witnessing Kuragan get his leg amputated. And Andrei feels this overwhelming swell of compassion for this man who he considered his enemy. And Andrei realizes that compassion and empathy for our fellow human beings is what life is all about, which is something that his sister Maria has been trying to teach him from the beginning of the book. And so it's really beautiful to watch him finally understand it, to finally get what his sister had been talking about for so long, and to really feel it deep in his bones because of this emotional, visceral experience. So I mentioned in my first video about the first half of the book that I think it's funny to me that Napoleon is a full-blown character in this book when he's just a historical figure, you know? But I do think it's interesting that we can delve deeper into Napoleon's psychology. There's a part where we're learning more about Napoleon, and he says that he feels predestined for his role in history. And he says it makes him a little sad that he has to kill so many people for the greater good. And this is Tolstoy's way of showing what a dangerous line of thought this is for any political or military leader. They start thinking that if they're predestined for this role, then that means that all of their actions are justified no matter what. They think that the rules that apply to normal people don't apply to them because they're special and chosen by destiny. I think that at the heart of it, this is an anti-war book. Soldiers on both sides think, for what and for whom must I kill and be killed? I don't want to do so anymore. That line really stuck out to me when I read it, because that's how people have been feeling all throughout history and are still feeling today. There's a part where Tolstoy goes on a tangent about math and philosophy, which would be cool to explore in an essay, but not in the middle of a novel. Time and place, sir. I really like the scene where the little girl is watching the discussion between the general of the Russian army, Kutuzov, and his military advisor. It's refreshing to see things through an innocent child's perspective after reading such heavy stuff. One character that I feel really bad for is Sonia, Natasha's cousin who lives with her. Natasha's mom is mean to Sonia, and Nikolai, Natasha's brother, doesn't keep his promise to marry Sonia. I really admired Sonia when she barricaded Natasha's door in an attempt to protect her from ruining her reputation with Kuragan, that awful rake. But other than that, Sonia doesn't really do much. She's just kind of there. And so I don't really get the purpose of her character. And I just feel really bad for how she's mistreated. I have to say that it's hilarious to me how many times Andrei dies and then is resurrected. It really, really is laughable. Like, how many times are we gonna do this? And so every time he does die, I can't help but feel like, is this real? Is he dead for real this time? Because I don't know. He keeps coming back. I found the part where Napoleon is thinking about how he wanted to conquer Moscow, what he wanted that to look like. I found that extremely fascinating. He wanted a big triumphant victory over Moscow, but when he arrived there, it was abandoned because all of the people had evacuated. And in that part, Tolstoy compares Moscow to a dead, empty beehive. And it's a really cool analogy to read. Another thing that I found fascinating is that Moscow is described as feminine. It is the mother city of Russia. It is a maiden who has been compromised by Napoleon. And I think it's so interesting that Moscow is described as female, while St. Petersburg is described as male. It feels more masculine not only in War and Peace, but also in Anna Karenina. In both books, Tolstoy compares the two cities, and he talks at length about how significant they both are to Russian culture and identity. The characters in both books jump between the two cities quite frequently. Both cities have rich histories, and significant fictional events take place in both cities in both novels. So the feminine Moscow and the masculine Petersburg are kind of like the parents of Russia, and that is so fascinating to me. I think my absolute favorite scene in the second half of this book is when Pierre is watching a flaming comet shoot across the sky, and in that moment, he finally accepts that he is in love with Natasha. It is a cosmic moment of destiny. It's superb. So, for quite a few chapters, Andre is wasting away. He is dying from his wounds, and he has a lot of spiritual experiences. He discovers the difference between human love and godly love, divine love. He forgives Natasha for what she did with Kuragan while she and Andre were engaged. Andre's heart softening is just beautiful, absolutely breathtaking. Oh, another scene I really love. There are a lot of really good scenes in the second half. It's kind of hard to pick a favorite, but another scene that I really loved is when Pierre saves the little girl from the burning building. And part of the reason why I love that so much is because it reminds me of the scene from SpiderMan 2 where something similar happens, but mostly because a French soldier helps Pierre find the child, despite his fellow soldiers telling him not to. And the soldier says, "We must be human. We are all mortal, you know." And so again, Tolstoy is pointing out that there is good in everyone, no matter what side of the war they're on. Andre has this really intense dream about death, and he discovers that death is an awakening, and that God is love, and life is love, and death is a returning of love to its original source. And I think that's just such a cool concept to ponder. It gets kind of funny later in the book when Tolstoy starts roasting Napoleon, calling him stupid and useless and childlike. And that is fun to watch Napoleon get knocked down a peg by Tolstoy after having pages and pages of Napoleon planning out his battle strategies and talking about how he feels like a god. And so it's funny to later read Tolstoy calling him just an absolute buffoon. I love Pierre so much. I love how he laughs at being imprisoned. He says, "How can anyone imprison an immortal soul?" His eternal being is so much bigger than his current petty circumstances. And I love that that's what he's thinking and feeling when he's a prisoner of war to the French. He's just not fazed by it at all because he knows he is an eternal being, and that temporary existence, that temporary time where he's a prisoner will not last forever. And in the grand scheme of things, will just be a blink. Okay, so I just wanted to say one thing about some of the metaphors and analogies that Tolstoy uses. I think a lot of them are beneath him, just because they're so simplistic and obvious. But maybe he's genuinely trying to teach people in simple, easily accessible terms. And if that's the case, then I guess I can understand. I have an example here. The fencer who demanded a contest according to the rules of fencing was the French army. His opponent who threw away the rapier and snatched up the cudgel was the Russian people. Those who tried to explain the matter according to the rules of fencing are the historians who have described the event. And so I just feel like that is so simple, so basic, so obvious, that I feel like what's even the point of using a metaphor if it's not beautiful and more complicated and intricate, and if it's not something that the reader has to work for. If he's just gonna spell it out, like, I don't really understand why he made it a metaphor or an analogy in the first place. I just personally find the simplicity of these metaphors and analogies to be very boring, especially because I've read the magnificent metaphors and similes and comparisons that he makes in Anna Karenina. So once again, like I mentioned in my first video about the first half of the book, I just need to not compare Anna and War and Peace too much, because they're two separate books written at two separate times in his life, and they're trying to communicate and accomplish different things. So I just need to be more accepting of that. But the simple comparisons do still annoy me. One relationship that I really enjoyed reading about and watching develop was the relationship between Natasha and Maria. They start out not liking each other, and then they end up close friends after enduring hardships together and bonding over their shared trials. As I said earlier, I like how Tolstoy emphasizes that there are good and bad people on both the Russian and the French sides. There's a part where some French soldiers are singing, and then there's a line that says the stars whispered something gladsome and mysterious to one another. And I just thought that was so beautiful. So if I had been Tolstoy's editor, I would have told him that this should have been two separate books. One book that followed the story of the characters, and another book where Tolstoy could go into detail about battle strategies and his gripes with historians and his opinions on the real true turning points of the war. Because all of that is valuable, but it's hard to trudge through it all when I just want to know what happens to Pierre. So that's the advice I would have given Tolstoy, but he probably wouldn't have taken it, so it doesn't really matter. But speaking of Pierre, the big something that Pierre has been searching for all his life has been right in front of him the whole time, and that is God. Pierre says, "By being ruined, I have become much richer." So as a prisoner of war, he learned that the material things of the world are not what really matter in life. When Pierre sees Natasha for the first time in a long time, he can't hide the fact that he's in love with her. It is so obvious to everyone, and Pierre and Natasha stay up till 3 a.m. talking and bonding. They truly understand each other on the deepest level. So very similar to how Andre has this beautiful awakening and softening, Pierre has an incredible change of heart. People that he used to be angry with, he just feels pity for now. In the past, he had to find good qualities about a person before he decided he could like them, but now he just loves everyone unconditionally. He loves God and he loves Natasha, and that makes him so happy that he can't help loving everyone else too. It's a very beautiful change. His character arc is so lovely, going from selfish and dissatisfied to loving and blissful. Natasha says that his new outlook on life makes him look clean, like he just took a bath. It's like he's been baptized. He's a new reformed person. So the way I feel about Natasha and Pierre ending up together is the exact opposite of the way I feel about Maria and Nikolai ending up together. Maria is so sweet and pious and has endured so much. She deserves a happy ending with a man who loves her completely and a marriage that is fulfilling and satisfying. And instead, she gets Nikolai. And unlike Natasha and Pierre, who understand each other perfectly, Maria and Nikolai don't understand each other at all. She doesn't get his fascination with farming, and he doesn't get her religiousness. They are a bad, bad, bad pair, and Maria deserves better. So just to go back to Natasha and Pierre, who are perfect for each other, I really, really like that Natasha is just completely herself around Pierre. She doesn't try to allure him constantly. I like her natural approach to their relationship. I also really admire her because she knows her own mind and she stands up for herself. Like when she insists on breastfeeding her children herself instead of hiring a wet nurse. I think that's very cool. But to go back to Maria, she just cannot be happy. And there's a line about Maria that I think perfectly sums up her character and her destiny. And I wrote it down on my computer, so I'll read it. Her soul always strove toward the infinite, the eternal, and the absolute, and could therefore never be at peace. So her soul is burdened by her body. She feels trapped in this mortal existence. So I think she marries Nikolai because she wants to suffer and prove her worthiness for blessings in the afterlife by enduring this not so great marriage with Nikolai, which is a pretty sad way to live. Another thing that I love about Natasha and Pierre is their dialogue after they're married. It's absolutely perfect. It's so natural and it flows so well, and it feels like you're watching a real couple talk. I love their relationship and how much they love, admire, and cherish each other. So, at the end of the book, there are 2 epilogues. The first epilogue ends with Andre's son having a dream about fighting in a war side by side with Pierre, who he idolizes. In the dream, Andre appears and lets his son know that he should stay close to Pierre and obey him and model his life after him. And I really like that. I like that Andre gives his blessing to his son and Pierre's relationship. Since Andre died several chapters before the epilogue, it's so nice to see him again at the end, because he and Pierre are the 2 main characters of the book, and so it gives the story a sense of completeness. The second epilogue is more ranting from Tolstoy. Yay! And because of that, the second epilogue is not as satisfying or fun to read as the first epilogue, in my opinion. But one line from the second epilogue that I really liked, I wrote down, and so I'll read it. Modern history, like a deaf man, answers questions no one has asked. And I think that's very true. And so there you go, that's the second half of War and Peace. I'm really proud of myself for reading it. I'm glad I accomplished my New Year's resolution to read this book in its entirety this year. As I have said many, many times, I still don't like it as much as Anna Karenina, but I did really, really enjoy it. Very beautiful characters, very inspiring relationships, and lots of ideas and concepts that make you think. So if you do want to read it, but you're intimidated by the length, I highly recommend doing what I did, just reading a chapter a day every day for an entire year, and by the end of the year, you're finished. I actually finished a little bit early, but you can do whatever works for you. So yeah, that's War and Peace. Thank you for coming on this journey with me, and thank you so much for watching.